ocean.
Housemarque's approach to AAA gaming feels like the direct antithesis of nearly every other studio. I've mentioned in as recently as my Little Devil Inside video that AAA games feel very clustered together, like they're all starting at the same point and then moving slightly off that point, leading to a heavy overlap in ideas, execution, gameplay, style, everything, and it's easy to see why that is. The closer you stay to that center, the more people you appeal to, and getting too adventurous or weird with your game will usually lead to you having a tougher time in the sales department because your potential audience just isn't as big as your peers. But Returnal has this, I don't care if everyone likes me, I'm focused on the group of people that are going to love me attitude that permeates through the indie video game space. Some people really won't be a fan of Returnal, and some won't even give it a shot because it doesn't check any of their boxes, and it's clear from the way that the game was designed, even from its opening message, that it has no problem with that. Returnal is uncompromising in its vision, and that vision coupled with Housemarque's progression as a studio has given us a game that I think is actually really important to talk about. Because based on how this game and Deathloop turn out, we might finally see the thriving indie game industry really make its mark and start to have a significant effect on the AAA market. Something I've been waiting on for a long time because I think it could begin to inject a heap of creativity into gaming as a whole. So let's buckle down and analyze the indie inspirations, unique AAA execution, and the potential future effects of Housemarque's Returnal.
I feel like an astronaut in the ocean.
Larry, I got a problem, man.
What's up, Gary?
You see, I want to make a new game, but I don't know what genre I should make it. You know, that's actually a good question. What I like to do is I put tape on the back of a bunch of slits of paper that have words on them, and then I throw them at a wall, and whatever sticks, I do. You know, that's actually a pretty good idea. I think I might do that. All right, 50 sheets of paper, 50 words. And they all stuck. They all stuck. Returnal is a... Hold on just one second, let me get the scroll here. Returnal is a bullet hell third-person narrative-driven action-adventure roguelite sci-fi shooter Metroidvania. Take that skill up, I see your long explanation, and I raise you more words. The thing is, third-person narrative action-adventure shooter is kinda Sony's thing, and it's the thing of a lot of bigger budget games. Almost all of the most popular games in the world have at least one of these qualities, and a lot of them have most of them. What's really interesting about Returnal are the three major aspects of it that have either been entirely confined to or heavily adopted by indie titles. I might not be the biggest games expert on the planet, but I can't think of a single AAA bullet hell or roguelite/roguelike game aside from this one, and obviously Deathloop is one of those two as well. I think the reason for that is that those components can't just be a side dish or an add-on to a game. They have to be front and center, and the whole game needs to revolve around those aspects, and they're both things that are instantly alienating to a large audience. Metroidvania elements have been incorporated in big games before. First of all, Metroid and Castlevania were big games themselves, but also we can see in examples as recent as Jedi Fallen Order how the idea of gaining new tools and abilities to let you access areas that have been teased to be just out of your reach previously can be placed into a game where exploration and backtracking isn't necessarily the main focus. Metroidvania elements can be a nice way to spice up your location and layer your exploration, but it can easily be used as a garnish on top of a basically complete game. It's like putting sprinkles on your cake. The sprinkles make it better, but the cake still exists without the sprinkles. You could take the Metroidvania aspects out of Jedi Fallen Order and you'd still have a pretty complete game on your hands. On the other hand, a roguelike gameplay loop and premise or bullet hell gameplay are things that affect the game's structure, items, narrative, and moment-to-moment combat. They become the eggs and flour of the cake. The second you decide that those things are going to be part of your game, they become main components of that game's identity. For a larger studio then, committing to these elements can be really tough. Roguelikes and lights are absolutely having a massive boom in popularity, but as much as it seems like they're taking over, it's actually still only a small section of players that have fallen in love with the genre. The most popular game in the roguelite genre in the past couple of years has been Hades. It's the most talked about and the most celebrated, and most places put its estimated Steam sales around 2 million as of 8 months after its 1.0 release. And in fact, 700,000 of those reportedly come from early access, so really you can say 2 years and 8 months. The Last of Us's initial PS3 release hit 7 million sales in its first year and has easily cleared 20 million at this point, and the game is only available on PlayStation hardware. Obviously the comparison isn't perfect because sales numbers are ridiculously annoying to find, and this doesn't include Hades' Switch sales, but you get the point I'm making. Even the biggest and baddest of the roguelite bunch is still only making waves in a small part of the gaming community. Bullet hell games have never really blown up at all. They've always been a niche interest. They just seem too difficult or present too much screen clutter and visual nonsense for a lot of people. Taking both of these things and combining them them would probably lead to great success for an indie game, like how Enter the Gungeon has hit 3 million sales over all platforms in its first 4 years, but that kind of return is pretty abysmal for a flagship experience, not to mention the huge cost disparity could turn off even some of the most hardcore fans of the genre. 99% of studios out there wouldn't touch an idea like this with a 10-foot pole, but Housemarque is different. If you've heard of Housemarque before Returnal, it was probably because of Resogun or Nex Machina, both highly acclaimed games, but very clearly working with a much smaller budget than their recent foray. They were known for being one of the last developers pushing arcade-style games, and while they did have the backing of Sony, who, for example, published Resogun, they were still a small team that had a very indie-like identity and output. Clearly, they loved making arcade games, but sticking too closely to the classic arcade experiences of old wasn't super financially viable. There just wasn't a big enough market for them, and Returnal was sort of born as a fully consoleized modern rebirth of arcade gaming. Lots of dangerous things flying at you at once, fast, frenetic gameplay, and permadeath were core to those old titles, and the exact same things are core to Returnal. If you asked Housemarque how they would describe this game, and they weren't giving you an answer just to sell the game or anything, it was just what they genuinely think of Returnal, they probably wouldn't have given you that long spiel I gave at the beginning of this section and would have just said, it's a modern arcade game. That's actually why I think they don't have saves in the game. It's something that they should have, and frankly I wish they had it, just in the capacity of saving your location and progress so you can quit the game during a run, or not get screwed over by crashes. Obviously I don't mean just being able to save and load, that doesn't make any sense for this kind of game, but the decision to have absolutely no saves at all definitely stemmed from the desire to keep this game arcadey in nature. Housemarque was damn good at making arcade experiences, and when their team was expanded by 150% and the amount of people they had working per game was expanded by almost 500%, instead of chilling out and creating the same thing everyone else does, they took their indie roots, other indie ideas, and an indie attitude and slapped on a bigger scope, and I genuinely think doing so, and taking that risk, can be crucial to the next phase of gaming. But before we get to that, let's actually talk about the story, gameplay, and how that scope and budget strengthen so many ideas that just aren't possible on a smaller stage.
Look, sir, the issue is just this is too small. We can't get a good look at it. Alright, how about you try this? Zoom in. Alright? Alright, more. Okay. More. 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 Okay, at this point we're just zoomed into 5 pixels, sir. Alright, fine. Enhance? How am I supposed to... there's no enhance button. Okay, I'm pretty sure there's an enhance button. No, there isn't. So what's that button right there? That would be an enhance button, sir. So you should probably press that button, right? Okay. Perfect. God, I love this job. No, okay, no, don't walk away. Come back. That shouldn't have been possible.
We've talked already about why some of these niche interests are kept away from big budget games, but the fact of the matter is, Returnal's released, it's been super well received, and it seems to be fairly popular. At the very least, I think it's a highly discussed title, so instead of looking at why this stuff is avoided, let's look into how it was ultimately pulled off. The first thing is we need to recognize what the relative strengths and weaknesses are for both types of games. For example, budget restrictions can actually work in the favor of smaller games because it forces the developer to whittle down their ideas a lot of the time. Doing so cuts out a lot of filler from these smaller budget titles and also means that what is there is highly polished and has had the maximum amount of effort poured into it. I think it's also a bit easier to have a fully unique setting, especially when you go 2D, because you can make some really absurd things without having to worry about the full architecture of a building, how to occupy heaps of potential empty space, and how to make believable and unique 3D models of everything from characters to enemies to statues or small structures. If you do go 3D, it's also way easier for a player to overlook the very simple art style because they know the context of the budget of this game, so you don't need to worry about making everything look incredibly sharp and textured. Indie worlds can often be super unique, while a lot of AAA games are either heavily inspired by real locations or are actually just a recreation of those real locations. Bigger games have the advantage of being able to create those fully realized environments with precise detail that indies can't. They also contain more state-of-the-art animation techniques, have fully rendered and detailed cutscenes with full voice acting, and give a more freeing movement experience, while also making it more fun to explore their locations when done properly, at least, because the verticality and clever hiding spots are just things that a lot of indie games don't have the luxury of pulling off. So how did Housemarque big budgetify an indie experience? Well, first of all, we can see a clear step up in terms of its setting, environment, and design. Without the restrictions of pixel art or a top-down view or just a smaller art team, they were able to build a fully realized planet with its own unique look, biomes, and handcrafted 3D spaces with plenty of detail. Being a roguelite, it was able to avoid needing to connect everything together in one big space, and instead is a bunch of discrete slices of a world placed one after another, marrying the uniqueness of indie worlds with the actual physical world building that's more often obtainable by a larger team. I think we can agree that AAA games have a higher capability to create immersive worlds than indies do. Whether they actually execute is a completely different question, but it's a lot easier to sell you on the fact that you're truly exploring and experiencing an alien planet when you're seeing fully realized environments, giant statues, towering holograms, and realistic looking creatures instead of seeing any of those things on a flat plane, or seeing more of a cartoony art style. Risk of Rain 2 is a good example to bring up because it's probably the game that's most similar to Returnal. Your ship thingy lands/crashes on this planet and you start shooting at everything. They both have a handful of biomes, some of them even look a little bit similar, and you need to fight bosses and move on to the next one. They have similarly minimal progression between runs, and they're both at a basic level 3D roguelites. Now, which one looks and feels more immersive? I'm not saying that Returnal is better or worse than Risk of Rain, that's not my point. It's just that Risk of Rain feels like it's pretty gamey at times, and it also looks very gamey. And Returnal instead feels like you're experiencing a full world. Both of these things absolutely work for their respective games, but this is an undeniable advantage of AAA. You can make more complete and detailed worlds when you have the people and budget to pull that off. To add to the visual advantages, enemies also were able to have a lot of visual consistency. This game has more tentacles than my hentai collection, but all of these enemies look super unique while also having these tendrils, head shapes, and attack similarities that lock them into all looking like they actually belong to the same race, or at least on the same planet. With less budget, it's harder to get cool, crazy designs like that because it'll maybe take up too much real estate, or everything's just gonna start looking like a giant octopus orgy. Having such a large 3D space is also great for creating a bullet hell experience that's pretty unique. Most of the games in this genre all take place on a 2D plane, so there's only so many places for the bullets to go. In Returnal, you can have an enemy shoot a block of projectiles at you from above while you're getting laser sniped from behind, while this dude sends purple rings and you need to jump over off to your side, and some ball is throwing out like 100 orange orbs outwards at once, and while it's tough, you can tell what's happening and a skilled player can avoid everything. In a normal bullet hell, if you have that much going on in that many directions, at a certain point the whole screen is just projectiles. It's unavoidable. And not to mention, you never have to jump over or duck past anything, it's just lateral attacks. Your free range of motion mixed with the little indicators and genius sound design really allow for an expanded and redesigned bullet hell experience that we haven't seen before. This also affects the uniqueness and flexibility of guns. This pylon gun, for example, would be way too overpowered in something like Into the Gungeon because, again, it's a 2D space, you can just connect it from wall to wall and things will run into it. But in Returnal, because you need to think a lot harder on how to connect to these more complicated, jutting out surfaces, as well as account for the three-dimensional movement of your enemies, it brings in the right amount of variability to offset the fact that this gun does damage at times when you're probably not even looking at it. On the flip side, we can see how a focus on arcadiness takes one of the most monotonous gameplay loops ever in the third-person shooter and makes it thoroughly engaging. Not only do you get to play with weapons that are different in more ways than just how much they scope in and how far and powerful they hit, but you're also free from the shackles of the cover system, and the combat becomes way more involved. You almost never have anything to hide behind in these games, and what you can hide behind is almost always getting destroyed pretty quickly, which is pretty contrary to most big third-person shooters that are all about shooting from cover. Even Uncharted, which ascribed to the cover shooter model more than almost any other game, realized how boring that could be and gave you a ton more scenarios in 4 where you had no cover and needed to move, or just made way more destructible cover so you couldn't be too reliant on it. But still, enemy bullets would hit you when you were out in the open and you had no say in that, while in these games you can dodge and weave and react to what's firing at you. Returnal's gameplay isn't like Uncharted or even like Doom, it's more methodical and precise than one while being more involved than the other. And that style of gameplay is lifted directly from indies and applied to a big game. Its arcade roots and AAA capabilities merge into some kind of super being that take ideas from one another. It has the cutscenes and acting you'd only see from a big game and a story premise that you'd only find in a small game. It has the locations, enemies, and combat spaces that feel expanses, but the ideas for each of these feel meticulously crafted. It's tough to make blanket statements about these two game types because it's easy to pick a few examples that are exceptions to some of the things I've said, but I will say that I don't believe anything I've played aside from maybe the Souls games have married the conventions of bigger and smaller games quite as much and quite as well as Returnal. And the most exciting part of that is that the success of this marriage, which is clearly on display in this game, has the potential to mean that after the past few years of everyone claiming that AAA games have become oversaturated, boring, formulaic, and just not innovative enough. While the indie space is putting out some of the best games ever made, we might actually be reaching a turning point where developers and more importantly big publishers are willing to incorporate some of the weirder, more outside the box ideas of those games into their own. A sort of mini renaissance of AAA gaming, if you will. So let's end the video off with exploring why I think the roguelike genre bursting through the mainstream and games like Returnal and Deathloop picking up what they're putting down has a potential to be a real turning point for video games. Hi Ryan Gosling, clone number 481. Hi Ryan Gosling, clone number 482. Hi Ryan... Wait, you don't look like Ryan Gosling.
You're damn right.
I look better. Come on, no you do. Oh my god, you kind of do.
Yeah, I'm a super sexy guy. Hey, you want a coffee?
Yeah, that's exactly what I needed.
I know.
I gotta get more of that guy. Risk. It's not just a board game I've never played before because I have no friends, it's also something that's incredibly important in helping any medium move forward. Risks in storytelling and filmmaking, subject matter, what you're willing to show. When a movie or show or a game comes out and takes a true risk in the sense that it's genuinely unclear whether the move will pay off or not, it's oftentimes met with a lot of criticism. Not always, but a lot. In the games industry, a recent example would be Death Stranding, a game that some people relentlessly make fun of and other people find to be transcendent. I have no particular feelings either way. I never had much of an interest in the game personally, if I'm being honest, but I think that games like Death Stranding, maybe not on their own, but especially when combined with other risky titles, start to open up the medium to further growth, and especially if the games perform well, they inspire other studios to take risks as well. The original Demon's Souls was another pretty risky game, and that sparked an entire genre of video games that continues to gain new fans. We're at a point where a brutally tough melee experience is the most anticipated game in the world right now, at least in terms of games that have actually been announced. And the hype around a really tough melee game just wouldn't have been this high 10 years ago. Some of the biggest risks in gaming in the past couple years have actually come from Sony, which is interesting considering they were just under fire from people claiming they never took any risks, but that's a whole other can of worms. But the thing is, Death Stranding, The Last of Us 2, and Returnal, regardless on anyone's personal thoughts on them, and in fact maybe due to so many people's different thoughts on them, were all risks. Returnal is a game that by definition should scare off a gigantic chunk of Sony's core audience. It's non-linear, brutally punishing with zero options to alter difficulty, forcefully repetitive, and exceptionally vague. It should not have been able to find an audience as big as it seems to have. Like I said in my opening sentence, the approach to this game is just the antithesis of almost any other AAA game, and that's including the universally praised ones. God of War is incredible, but it does have a combat system similar to a lot of games we've seen before, its story was sequential, and its core character dynamic is now a proven quantity in gaming. It's hands down one of the best games of the past generation, but its ideas weren't necessarily trailblazing. And while that takes away absolutely nothing from that experience, a game that does have the potential to spark change, I think should be acknowledged for that fact. I just went into how Returnal was able to take an existing genre and put so much into it that we haven't seen before because of its financial backing. And from trailers, I think we can see that Deathloop is taking that same genre and making it an almost sandbox-like experience, which is something that I only think is possible for a larger studio. Committing to this stuff is difficult, but following through leads to more games being given more creative freedom and having more games that meet the cravings of people who've gotten sick of or have never been into mainstream titles. As publishers like Activision effectively close down some of their best studios and reassign them to help continue their yearly, incredibly repetitious franchise, I think it's important to see more AAA games like Returnal show that there's more to making a game that people enjoy besides just following the same blueprint every single time. Thank you to everyone who watched this far. If you did make it this far into the video, hit that sub button. I'd really appreciate it. My channel's still in that startup phase and I'm putting more and more time and effort into these videos, meaning the growth has been a bit slow. So any support would be awesome. Sharing this video would also be great because the more people start watching it, the more YouTube actually shows my content to people, and it's been doing a very poor job in that department recently, so that would be a big help. My next full analysis video is probably going to be on It Takes Two. Keep an eye out for that one, but I also do game discussion and smaller videos here and there as well, so if you're interested, check out the channel. Find something you like, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.